if I can remove this. So the governor has crises, so we're gonna keep to the 30 minutes. So I'm not going to introduce him.
It's not as bad as the federal government. I hear they might shut down Sunday nights. So we do have to prepare for that, though. That's one of the things we have to work on. We can talk about that, too.
Well, I'm not going to introduce you because I think people probably know who you are. But let's start with a shutdown question. I think this is obviously the topic of the day. You signed the executive order yesterday telling your administration to kind of prepare for it, especially when it comes to national parks and public lands. I was talking to Senator Hickenlooper earlier, and he said he went through this when he was governor, and it cost the state hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep the parks open. Do you have an idea about how much the cost is going to be for the state, and how much are you able and willing, prepared to spend?
Yeah, so that's going on right now, Jesse. So literally our team is talking to feds, we're figuring this out. The short answer is it's very likely to be worth it, in that the money that we don't expect to be reimbursed that we would use to support the parks is just a teeny amount compared to the economic impact of the parks, especially during the peak fall season with the fall foliage and the trees. This is a very important time. The biggest park, bigger than our others combined, Rocky Mountain National Park, but of course we care about our other national parks, Mesa Verde and Gunnison and Sand Dunes. But it's a big deal. We're figuring this out in real time now, and we are hoping that for both this shutdown, if it occurs, and I do hope it can be avoided. We just did a statement with Governor Cox, NGA, calling on the House to simply pass the short-term continuing resolution from the Senate. That's a month and a half. It goes to mid-November. Yes, they disagree on things. That gives you a month and a half to figure out whatever you disagree on, but let's keep government open while you do it. But if there is one, we are moving forward with trying to make sure that the single biggest economic impact to our state, which is the national parks, are able to stay open.
And would you be paying the national park employees? Like, where does that money exactly go?
Yeah, so by the way, we're not alone in this. Arizona, Grand Canyon National Park, enormous economic impact. Utah, there's several states that are really pursuing similar things. The question is, how can we effectively take it on ourselves to pay to keep those open? So there's discussion of using everything from the National Park Foundation to the Foundation for the actual park towards moving over the payroll responsibility. It's likely to be the same people. I mean, we're not talking about, to be clear, somehow training state workers to go in and do that. You can't do that in 3 or 4 days. This would be the same workers. It would simply be on Colorado's dime, because it's worth it to us to keep these parks open from an economic perspective and also for the enjoyment of our fellow Coloradans.
All right, well, let's jump into one of your big policy priorities at the Capitol this year and probably next year, affordable housing. Your land use bill failed at the Capitol this year. I wonder if you plan on bringing a similar measure this year, and what changes do you think that you're going to make to get it passed this time around?
Well, as I travel across the state, I just was in Fort Collins yesterday for a town hall. I've done big town halls in Grand Junction and Pueblo, Aurora. Housing costs are popping even more than before as the existential issue that Coloradans face. I think the reason it's become even more urgent is because of the cost of financing and mortgages has increased substantially since when we asked the legislature to look at measures to make housing more affordable in our state. So I think there's a lot more interest out there. The crisis has become worse. What we're hearing from a lot of people is they want to go a lot bigger and bolder than years past and really figure out how we can remove some of those artificial constraints on supply and allow more housing to be built, bring housing costs down. Just this morning I was visiting an accessory dwelling unit with Senator Gonzalez and Habitat for Humanity in West Denver. Great example, longtime homeowner, and he added, and I had never seen one before, he added a 3-bedroom accessory dwelling unit. A lot of them are 1 or 2 bedroom. There's a 3-bedroom. So in the community, it's more affordable. It'll be a rental unit, provides income for him, which helps because, his property taxes have gone up like everybody's, although with Prop HH you could see some relief, but they're still going up. And it provides an affordable way to live close to where jobs are. That's what we need more of. That's what we need a lot more of. And we're focused on working with Republicans, Democrats, the legislature, all stakeholders to solve this issue. It'll only get worse until we grapple with it.
But what about specific policy ideas? I mean, if you double down on the idea that didn't work.
There's no silver bullet. I mean, I think, as I said, what we're hearing from a lot of people in the field is that a lot of the things in 213 didn't go far enough. It really needs to think bigger and bolder. You need to look at transit. You need to look at transit plan development. I mean, there were different things in the bill at different times. I think there's going to be many bills on housing. on removing artificial constraints on housing. I mean, it's the top thing we hear everywhere we go. It's probably the top thing if most people here in this room or your friends or family are experiencing right now in some way, shape, or form, is you're grappling with the high cost of housing. It's important because people need a roof over their head, but it's also important economically to our success as a state, because the high cost of housing is strangling our success as a state. This is most pronounced in the mountain resort areas, where literally you'll have stores, restaurants that close 2-3 days a week, missing out on sales. The demand is there, but they can't have the staff to do it. But in the Denver metro area, with homes over $600,000 average price, mortgage rates much higher than they were before, this is the time for everybody to put their ideas on the table, and for the legislature and us and all the stakeholders to really think big about how we can change this trajectory to avoid Colorado becoming California. It's not too late.
So one of the bills that's on the table or coming on the table would be a construction defects change, right? So an idea to make to reduce the amount of litigation that condo builders face in particular. I know there's a couple state lawmakers who are looking at that. Are you part of those conversations? Is that something that you would be interested in?
Well, look, our approach is going to be very simple. Anything that will reduce housing costs, we're for. That will reduce housing costs, especially it'll help build more condos, which tend to be more affordable. Of course, we're supportive of that. We're supportive of any measure that legislators can put forward that reduce housing costs, and the flip side of that, opposed to measures that would increase housing costs for Coloradans. That's the lens that we look at every bill that relates in some way to housing, even if it's one or two steps tangential to it. It absolutely could impact the cost of housing. And we're going to look at it through that lens, because the people of Colorado want to make sure that we make housing more affordable, not less affordable.
Okay, so on the flip side of that, though, there are some Democrats in the legislature who kind of bristle at the idea of construction defects reform because they're worried about protecting purchasers, from potential construction defects that they might face in the condo that they're buying. So how do you find that balance in your mind?
Well, I mean, that's what the lawmaking process does. I think, obviously, again, if you can reduce the cost of insurance for some of these projects and allow more condos to be built, I think what we're hearing is often apartments for rent are built in lieu of condos because of liability issues. Obviously, the bigger problem is a lot of areas aren't allowing these units to be built at all, whether they're apartments or condos, and that's why we need to talk about the permitting and the land use. But assuming that one's built, we do like condos. Why? Because of ownership and the pathway to the American middle class, and how you build wealth is ownership. Of course, rent is fine. People need a roof over their head. But we really want to transform renters into owners. We need more inventory that people can afford to buy, units in the 200s to 300,000s. That's what's missing in our market. And by our market, I mean the greater Denver market, the greater Colorado Springs market, the greater Grand Junction market. Yes, of course, we're fine with rental units, not against them, but really passionate about home ownership as a way that people can achieve the American dream and build equity and value over their lives intergenerationally, especially people from disadvantaged backgrounds that don't have that legacy of home ownership.
So you talked a little bit about the idea of transit and transportation around home ownership. Colorado Public Radio reported recently that you want to see a 2024 ballot measure raising taxes to form a front-range passenger rail system. Is that something that you envision the legislature referring to the ballot? And how much do you think the tax increase would be, and for how long are you guys working out those details?
Well, what you're talking about is something that the legislature does not need to do. This is a front-range rail district already created. They were created with a specific purpose of coming up with a plan for front-range rail. Front-range rail is something that I'm very impatient on. This is something we should have had 10 years ago. I'm like more than mad. It's not something that we should be talking about for like 20 years from now. We should either, get our business done or get off the pot. Like, let's do this thing. So yes, we need Front Range Rail. We're a growing community, 3 million people in the Front Range, Fort Collins through Pueblo. It's part of that overall solution. If we can provide a rail solution, and I think we can, that gets people where they want to go faster and lower cost than driving, people will take advantage of it. So we're talking about rail, 80 miles an hour or so. Yes, it'll get you to your destination faster. Fort Collins to Denver, 40, 45 minutes. Colorado Springs to Denver, under an hour. No traffic. And then the question is cost. And of course, the reason this is more possible than ever before is because of the unprecedented federal opportunities for matching funds. under the Infrastructure Act, and we are very aggressive in courting those funds. We are also looking at rail as a solution to the ski corridor as well, to alleviate some of that traffic off of 70. So rail isn't everything, but rail is something. And for areas that have passenger rail with wide utilization, absolutely helps get cars off the road, cleaner air, reduces congestion, convenient to people, and saves money.
Okay, so we know about front range passenger rail. You mentioned mountain rail. Is that something doable within the next 3 years before you leave office?
Yeah, I'm very impatient. It was doable 5 years ago.
How do you do it, though?
So what you have in the mountains, first of all, in Hayden and Craig, with the closure of the coal plants, 29, but also scaling back starting 25, 26, you have additional rail capacity on some of those lines. You have built-in demand. We know that's strong. And so the most viable rail corridor that, of course, we're looking at is a rail solution from Denver to Steamboat to Winter Park, also for workers, Hayden and Craig, into the mountain communities that need workers, ties into housing. So this is all important. When we look at the Denver metro area, though, we do tie it to the housing solution, because when you look at areas that have successfully implemented transit, rail solutions, of course, bus and other forms of transit too, you have to look at transit plan communities. How can people live near where they can commute to job centers? And so you have to make sure that those areas are allowing for and empowered to do multifamily capacity, where you have the customer base built in that wants to avail themselves of the transit options. And that provides the economy of scale you need that reduces cost for the transit option and makes it viable. So the two really go hand in hand.
Okay, now, as the skier and the train geek, though, I was like, do you think there's going to be a mountain rail bill this year?
Will it be what?
A mountain rail bill?
Well, yeah, I don't know what needs bills and what doesn't. I mean, the front range one, I believe is all done legislatively. Maybe there needs to be something else, or there's some state participation in funding. But the mechanism is already there. I think there's a discussion of what mountain rail would look like. Again, I think it's premature to say, does there need to be a bill? Does it need to be a bunch of local governments, forming a consortium? There's different ways of doing that. But the bottom line is this is viable. We just, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, we were in Pueblo at the Pueblo Rail Yard, and we were on a natural gas powered train, which is going to California, but as you know, we test a lot of the rails here in Pueblo before they continue on. And it was exciting. We took a ride with members of the media. I assume you were invited.
I was not invited.
You must have been invited. I went far and wide.
I'm kind of sad now.
Everybody except for the Sun was invited.
Maybe someone else at the Sun.
But it was a good opportunity with a number of members of the public, and the media was there too, just to kind of experience what that was like. And we will be looking at those kinds of technology opportunities. When people say rail, people like it. The only thing you ever hear negative about rail, you can tell me if you hear anything different, is either it's loud or it smells. Those are the only two things I ever hear that are negative. Guess what? If you use electric batteries or natural gas, totally quiet, doesn't smell. So if we can address those two things, I think everybody's on board with rail. Choo choo.
I think folks in Fort Collins who have to wait in traffic might feel differently, but that's a conversation for maybe
it's because of the noise, right?
Well, the long waits and we don't have enough time to go into that.
Also, that's not passenger, right? Those are really long freight trains. So yeah, passengers a lot more pleasant to be around.
True. All right, let's delve into water because we're going to hit like a million topics. The legislature created the Colorado River Water Task Force this year, and there was some reporting that your office kind of prompted that, where the legislature wanted to go further and pass some legislation. Do you think like this will be the year that water legislation is passed, that they punted in 2023 to 24 with this task force? Are you committed to getting something done in 24?
Well, I think there's been some water legislation every year that I've been governor, so I think it depends what you're looking at. We've made great progress in funding water projects, first of all, including using one-time funds. We also now, rather urgently, have to deal with the Supreme Court overturning the Waters of the U.S. rule. So we have a stopgap or administering things, but we need a legislative law around what has now been turned over to the states. So that's going to happen. We continue the work on the basin discussions. And we have, of course, elevated the Colorado River Basin discussion, which now, as you know, is showing increased federal interest in a solution, and we've upped our game on preparing for making sure we defend Colorado's water rights aggressively.
What about, is there any, I know you have this like libertarian streak, but is there any role for the state to limit, for instance, certain kind of crops from being grown, or a percentage, or is that a potential way to deal with the water scarcity crisis?
No, I mean, certainly what one thing that we've talked about is if we can figure out housing, that also helps fix water. So just 2 days ago, I was in Westminster at ribbon cutting. As I tell my kids, one thing about this job, I get really good at using scissors, like really good. I'll challenge any of you to a scissor off any day of the week. So I go to, a couple of ribbon cuttings a week. So this was 2,500 units, and they really thoughtful development in Westminster. They including open space and bike lanes and mixture of affordability and market rate. But the point is, those units are about 2 to 3 times as water efficient for their new residents as legacy residents and existing housing there. So a lot of the housing we're talking about allowing to be built and bringing on board, whether it's accessory dwelling units, multifamily, duplexes, is far more water efficient. And that's exactly what we need. I also did an executive order around state lands and our lawns and things like that. So we're trying to get rid of, if you will, our features that need water for turf, aggressively working to phase those out over the next few years to model that. City of Aurora put some strong water measures in place. So we're not done. We're very excited to tackle this, but I'd say the single biggest one that is out there is housing, and we look forward to really aligning the water conservation needs of the state with our state housing policy.
But respectfully, residential water use is such a small fraction.
20%.
Right. I mean, agriculture is the other 80, right? So, I mean, don't you have to tackle the agricultural side of things? You can't just, multi-unit housing your way out of the water crisis that we have.
Well, in many ways, it's our fastest growing. So the challenge you face is as our population grows, you face buy and dry. You face fast-growing suburbs buying up water rights from farmers, leading to dryland agriculture. We want to preserve not only our agricultural heritage, but our single biggest export as a state. Ag products grown in Colorado, raised in Colorado. That being said, we do have new programs at the Department of Agriculture around soil health and stewardship, around agrivoltaics, which is co-production, which has water efficiency gains because it uses the partial shading of the panels. So there's a number of technologies and ways that we're looking at supporting through our Department of Ag, farmers and ranchers being part of that water solution as well.
All right, let's talk about Proposition HH, the 10-year property tax relief measure on the November ballot. It's clear that education groups see this as a way to boost funding for education by increasing the Tabor cap. I don't have time to explain what Tabor is, but hopefully folks in the room know what it is. I wonder if that was really one of your goals with this proposal. Republicans are critical in saying, look, this is a school funding measure dressed up as a property tax measure. Did you have schools in mind when you put this together?
Well, really what I challenged the legislature to do was 3 things. One, provide immediate relief to homeowners because of the significant increases in property tax assessments. Number 2, provide a mechanism to prevent tax rates for homeowners from going up too fast in the future. And third, address some of the inequities of the Gallagher Amendment, which put too much of the burden on our businesses. The business rates are much higher. We're 49th lowest for home property taxes. That's wonderful. We want to keep us there. We need relief. But we're like 24th for businesses. So that is a detriment to job creation. When businesses save money on property taxes, they can put it into salaries and growth and hiring. It helps companies choose to make siting decisions in Colorado. So those are the 3 things that I'm in it for. It does all 3, about $500-600 a year in savings for average homeowner. Obviously depends on the person, some 400, some 800, whatever it is. The truth in taxation cap, which is the default, only allows it to go up by the rate of CPI unless voted on by the democratically elected officials in the area. And then third, a substantial cut to the commercial property tax rate. So those are the things that I'm excited about.
But let me ask the question again. Did you have school funding in mind with this? I mean, are you hopeful that this will boost school funding?
Well, it's good for the budget in general. It does other things that I like. For instance, it allows the portability of the senior homestead exemption. We have seniors today that live in homes where if they downsize, they pay more in property taxes, which makes no sense in the world. So literally, you have a senior living in a 3-bedroom home. If they downsize to a 1-bedroom, they pay more. Makes no sense. So let's change that. So yeah, there's plenty of other things in it, but I told you the 3 things that I charge the legislature with that that I'm for, and this solves for all 3 of those. Provides immediate relief for property taxes, will prevent them from going up too fast in the future, and cuts the commercial rate to make Colorado businesses more competitive and help people pay better salaries and hire more people.
All right. Well, as you know, it's not a given that it will pass, and I wonder, if you're planning for contingencies. I think I asked this at a press conference and I got laughed at, so maybe I'll ask again. What happens if this doesn't pass? Do you call a special session and just, make a flat rate cut? Do you have an alternative in mind? Are you guys thinking?
The issue of property taxes doesn't go away. I'm somewhat mystified by some of those who say they're voting against this because they say it's not perfect. Well, I say, we'll vote for it because it's a step in the right direction. And obviously, doesn't mean you can't do anything else about property taxes in the future. There's lots of ideas about how we can prevent property taxes from growing too fast, and happy to talk about other options. Whether this passes or fails, I think there's a lot of discussions about property tax. But again, my core values are you got to provide relief, you got to prevent rates from going up in the future, and you got to rebalance in terms of making it less onerous on small businesses in Colorado who we're in the top 50% of states versus being the 49th state lowest for home.
All right. The legislature for years has had this discussion on property taxes about how to handle short-term rentals. It seems to come up every year, and people get yelled at, people show up at the Capitol. Do you support changing or increasing the rate, property tax assessment rate for short-term rentals?
So yeah, that's simpler in a sense. This is in some ways a loophole. So here's what you have. You have short-term rental properties owned by commercial owners that are basically competing with bed and breakfasts, inns, lodges, hotels. They do the same business. Somebody's shopping, they say, I'm going to stay at bed and breakfast, I'll stay at an Airbnb. We're talking about full-time rental properties. And yet, they have a very disparate tax treatment. And so yes, the tax treatment should be uniform, absolutely. If it's a commercial property, if you're running it as a short-term rental, it should be treated just like Airbnbs and other properties that you compete with. We shouldn't be subsidizing that vis-a-vis other legitimate businesses.
Do you have like a threshold? I know there's been discussed, like how many days in a year would a property have to be a short-term rental?
Right. So the flip side of it is, and I agree with this too, yes, you own a home, you're gone for 2 weeks, you want to rent it out, that doesn't mean you're a commercial property. I totally agree with that too. So I totally think that there's a way to come up with a reasonable threshold. I think what you're talking about here are bona fide commercial properties competing with bed and breakfast and hotels. That's different than you're a owner occupancy, you're gone for 2 or 3 weeks a year, you decide to get a little income. No, that's still residential. So I don't think it's that hard, and I'm open to any reasonable discussion about what that is. Maybe it's a cutoff at 90 days of rental. Maybe it's, they talk at the beauty, the economists in any of us would say, oh, let's make it prorated so it's perfect economically, but that's just so much paperwork for everybody. Like, I'm fine with it philosophically, but in the real world it doesn't work out that well. So you probably just want to have some cutoff that's reasonable, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, something like that.
Okay. Obviously, reasonable and politics doesn't always go well together. So in the last couple of minutes here, I want to kind of get to just a few topics. We'll just hit them quickly. Legislature is set to debate a measure again that would pave the way for so-called overdose prevention centers, safe use sites. You've expressed opposition to the past. Do you think there's any way that that bill could be written in a way that gets your support?
Well, I think that this has become the problem, well, this is a multifaceted issue here. So I think we're talking about homelessness, drug abuse and mental health as contributors to homelessness, how cities deal with that. Cities do have broad discretion under current law not to nullify our drug laws, of course, and I do oppose their ability to nullify our state and federal drug laws, but they do have broad discretion around where and how they deal with shelter. It's a big issue in Denver right now. The state has positioned ourselves as a partner. We want to help, Denver, Aurora, Colorado Springs, Boulder, Fort Collins, every city that addresses this, and we do, meaning we just have some funding open now, cities are competing for it. We want to help we're not going to create the solution, we can't, because it has to be on the ground and tie into what you're doing locally. But I do support efforts to end homelessness, reduce homelessness, make Colorado safer, and we look forward to the state being a partner with our mayors in doing that.
Okay, is that a no? I mean, to a site where people could use drugs under the supervision of trained professionals who could revive them in an overdose situation.
Look, I mean, I've certainly been in favor, as you know, of legalizing marijuana. There's, other areas that we can look at liberalizing the drug law, but those areas do not include fentanyl and meth, which are the main culprits in this case and have absolutely devastating impacts. If anybody's had a loved one or friend who's had trouble with them, we absolutely need to use diversion and other ways to get people into treatment so that they can recover their dignity in their lives.
All right, assault weapons ban or a ban on the sale of assault weapons in Colorado. A bill was brought and didn't make it through in the legislature. If that landed on your desk, how would you?
Well, a lot of the whole discussion around gun safety is now under the framework of the Bruin decision. So it's a little bit different legal context. As you probably know, you reported on it, even our increase in the age limit is not in force right now. And our 3-day waiting period is going in. We'll see if that lasts.
I think today.
Yeah, we'll see how the court docket on that. This is a tough fight on everything, but I mean, we have not yet even succeeded in being able to raise the age limit to 21. Currently in Colorado, and this is the case now because our law is temporarily not in effect, we hope temporarily, at 18 you can buy a rifle, but you have to be 21 to buy a pistol. And that's the way it's been for decades. So why do we have I don't know why you should have different ages for different categories of weapon. If anything, some of these rifles are actually more powerful than pistols, but I mean, we don't need to get into that argument. But 18 for a rifle, 21 for a pistol. We just said 21 for both, whatever the kind of weapon is. Gun safety is part of the overall discussion on public safety. We've got our goal we expressed, we want to make Colorado one of the 10 safest states. We're a year into that. I expressed that this will be a big focus of ours for the next term. You'll see the budget that we'll be presenting in November, public safety forward, reducing auto theft, going after crime, victim services. Colorado needs to be safer, and we will look at all policies that help get us there, and that would include looking at gun safety policies, especially those that we think are going to be defensible in court.
All right, you got to run, but I want to give you kind of a softball. And in the idea of SunFest, our slogan here is for a better Colorado, and I wonder just if you can talk about what a better Colorado means to you as the leader of our state.
I think a better Colorado means two big things, and you're not going to be shocked by what I say. It means it needs to be more affordable and safer. And those are the two themes that color the actions that I take as governor. It needs to be safer, lower crime, lower property theft. People need to be safe walking in the store at night in their neighborhoods. These encampments and drug paraphernalia should not be part of a safe Colorado. Bike theft, all those things. More affordable Colorado. We're in it for all the big costs people face. And top cost for people, guess what? Housing. After that, healthcare. So saving people money in healthcare, the work continues, priority for me, passion for me, and housing. We've got to save people money in housing. We've got to facilitate the development of more housing that people can afford, close to where jobs are, make sure that we can break down barriers to home ownership. All of those things that we need to do are what we need to do to make Colorado better. Affordability, safety, and I would add sustainability as a third.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Governor. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you. We got through a lot.